Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of On the Couch. I'm Stephanie Baker, the Executive Director of Life in Abundance, and I am also a clinical pastoral counselor on staff. One of the things that I do as a disclaimer to begin with is remind everybody that I am not licensed by the state of South Carolina. I am a clinical pastoral counselor with Life in Abundance. We are a nonprofit that offers counseling to families in the upstate, men, women, and children, because we believe that when we strengthen families, we strengthen our community. On the Couch was developed as our podcast because we wanted to be able to provide everybody in the community with extra information about things that might seem a little bit mysterious, things that regarding counseling, things regarding functional and medical nutrition that might be helpful to you to know. And also, we want to highlight other ministries within the area that might have benefit to you through resources they have to offer, and you may not know about them. So, again, as we're talking about counseling topics, I'm not just talking to counselors that are on my team. I'm talking to counselors that I actually refer to from time to time. And that's one of the things that I'm so grateful for with Life in Abundance. And that is that we have a strong referral network. And this is important because we're not the solution for everybody. And so we want to make sure that if we're not the right fit for whatever the reason is, that we can connect people to people that are in the mental health industry. And I'm super excited today because I have with me Hal Stewart. And Hal is one of the co-founders for the Center for Sexual and Relational Health. He is an LPC licensed by the state of South Carolina. He's a board certified sex therapist. He's a certified sex addiction therapist and a certified trauma therapist partner. And Hal is here today to talk with us about pornography addiction and sex addiction. The very first time I went to run a support group for women who had just discovered that their spouses were involved in sex addiction, pornography addiction, and possibly infidelity, in addition to all of those, I had to turn people away because our facility could not hold the number of people that wanted to sign up for the support group. This is an issue that faces us in our families, and it is such a broad issue, such a broad topic. So we're going to talk to Hal today, and more than likely, we're going to have to ask him to come back to continue wherever it is we leave off today because we are time limited. But Hal, welcome. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us and answer questions that we might have. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very well. It's so nice to be with you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. And we go back a long ways, actually. And I remember just being blown away by you the first time I ever met you. We were doing a little networking, actually. And I am so grateful that that happened. I know that Life in Abundance has worked with the Center for Sexual and Relational Health on a number of situations with spouses who are facing betrayal trauma and spouses who are struggling with pornography and sex addiction. I think, and this is a hard topic to talk about for a lot of people. I will say that although I know that some churches will talk about it, I don't think it's widely discussed in churches. It's the sort of the topic that nobody wants to touch or really talk about, and there's a ton of shame that surrounds it for both parties, the spouse who is in the midst of the addiction and the spouse who is married to the person in addiction. And when they decide to get help, they're both in recovery. So we'll talk about that. But I'd like for you to, as best you can, can you define? Is it possible to define what sex addiction really is?
Yeah, so there are many definitions. Um, Interestingly enough, there's no universal agreement on what addiction is,
Okay.
and there's no universal agreement on what sex addiction is, or whether or not it even exists.
Wow.
Yeah,
That's stunning. That's actually
it
very
is
stunning
stunning.
to hear.
It really is stunning. And if I could go back to something when you're talking about churches, when I first started doing this, Stephanie, I reached out to churches telling them what I was offering. And I literally had churches contact me and ask me to take them off of my mailing list.
Wow.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. And
Wow.
so I think that is changing, and I'm very grateful for that. I'm grateful there are leaders who themselves have struggled, who
Yes.
God has taken lemons and making lemonade
Yes.
by, you know, giving them the ability to stand before people um, and to bring it into the light. So back to your original question, I'm glad you're bringing that up because in terms of defining it, um, I tell couples often if we're going to use terms, we need to agree on terms.
Yes.
So, and it's not so much that you have to agree with anybody else's terms, but if you're a couple, the two of you need to agree on what that means for you and your relationship. And if you're working with a therapist, you and your therapist need to be on the same page in
Hmm.
terms of um, what that means. So it depends on who you're talking to. Um, Carol Clark says that addiction is any obsessive compulsive behavior that you will continue to do despite negative consequences. So that's a pretty simple definition. Patrick Carnes says it's
Out
a
of the
path of,
shadows.
yes, he wrote Out of the Shadows. Um, says, it's a pathological relationship with any mood altering behavior or chemical. Um,
That's
so
wide.
it's a really
Yeah.
broad definition. And so any sexually related, and if you think about it, if you look at his work, Dr. Carnes says there are 20 subtypes of sex addiction.
Wow.
Pornography is only one
Yeah.
subtype, which we will talk about today. But he says any sexually related compulsive behavior that will interfere with your normal living and causes severe stress for you or your family or your friends or your loved ones, or even your work environment. So it is a broad term. If you go to the DSM-5, of course, or you look at the World Health Organization, you can actually look up criteria for addiction, and that would be more specific. So I tend to use those broader terms, knowing that, of course, Dr. Clark, Dr. Carnes, Dr. Skinner, anybody in this field, they are well aware of the DSM-5 and how um, sex addiction does align with that.
Hmm. Okay.
Um, the other thing I think would have to agree on is, since you specifically asking about pornography addiction, is what is
Hmm.
pornography?
Yes.
Yeah. So if you think it's any printed, written, that's important, or visual material that contains explicit description or display. So either one of those could be just a description or a display
Hmm.
of sexual genitalia, sexual organs, or sexual activity. And and the purpose of that being to stimulate erotic instead of emotional or even aesthetic feelings. So you're really
Hmm.
looking for that erotic feeling.
Hmm.
Um, and a lot of times, what is overlooked, I do have guys who are addicted to what's called erotica, and it's all written. There are no pictures,
Hmm.
and but it's specifically to engage and stimulate those erotic feelings.
Okay. Okay. And this might be a good time for me to pause and again tell our audience that if you have kids in the car, I mean, I introduced what the topic was going to be, but if you have kids in the car and you're listening to this or they're in the house, whatever, you may want to find a private place to listen to this particular podcast. But so as you were saying, Hal, there's a wide variety of terminology that can be used.
Mhm.
I'm curious, and I want us to get into a little bit more detail about that. You co-founded the Center for Sexual and Relational Health. That clearly came out of a need that you identified. Um, Tell us a little bit about the Center for Sexual and Relational Health and how you guys are designed to work with this.
Yeah, so part of it is out of my own story. And so again, taking lemons and making lemonade is, um, I was drawn to this field because I wanted to help guys who were struggling with some of the same things that I struggled with,
Hmm.
and wanting them not to do what I did, which is lose my marriage in 2000.
Mm,
So if I can help them not do that, I'm all in.
yeah,
That's what I feel called to do, actually. And so part of it's that, um, but as I was, the more I studied, really what I really want people to be doing is not so much moving away from unhealthy sexual behavior. This might sound odd, but I don't want that to be the focus. I don't want you moving away from unhealthy sexual behavior. I want you to move towards healthy sexual behavior.
yes,
So, what I say is the easiest way not to head east is to head west. And we know the way the brain works is if I tell you to not think of a red apple, of
the
course,
first thing I think
it's
of.
the first thing you think of.
Right,
So if I think if a person's focus is on not watching porn, what the brain hears is watching porn, right? So
right,
the subconscious is always um, eavesdropping. And it basically says, your wish is my command, right?
right,
And so, um, and so what we wanted to do is really develop, we do need to address the unhealthy behavior. So we need to do triage. We need to stop the bleeding.
right,
So classic cognitive behavioral therapy, you want to stop the behavior on the front end and let the brain start the healing process, which according to, the research takes at least 90 days for that, to be taking place. And and so we stop the bleeding, and but then what we need to be doing is not just educating about sexual addiction, learning what's behind that, but also moving towards sexual health. Now, that comes a little later because on the front end, there do tend to be many things kind of feeding someone's addiction. You've already mentioned the biggest one being shame.
right.
So Dr. Carnes, he's not alone in that. Bradshaw, Kaufman, the people who've researched shame, they say that shame is the core of addictions, period. But Dr. Carnes says certainly sexual addiction. So and so that's not a peripheral, no, it's the core. It is the jumping off place
Yeah,
or um, and so to be treating family of origin issues, treating trauma is another really big part
hmm,
of sexual addiction. Um, to treat all the drivers of it. Just stopping the behavior is first order change.
Right.
Right? And what we do want to do that, by the way, but then what
Right.
we want to move towards is that second order change, is changing the beliefs,
Hmm.
the attitudes, um, that are driving that behavior. So a lot
And
of guys can actually stop the behavior.
hmm.
I think it's Woody Allen that said, stopping smoking is easy. I have done it 1,000 times, right?
Right.
So just stopping, that's part of it.
Right.
But recovery is putting all the things in
Yes.
place to maintain the sobriety.
It's the program, it's the plan that you can follow.
Absolutely.
I would
Absolutely.
guess, and push back if I'm misinformed on this, but I would guess that one of the hardest things, if somebody's struggling with sexual addiction or pornography addiction, okay, however we define that, um, one of the hardest things is to admit, because of the shame, that this is going on. I would bet that people who come to you, um, male or female, would be, because this isn't just a male, a, dominated addiction. It's not.
That's right.
So, but I would guess that if they can even speak at that point when they're sitting in your office, because I'm guessing that some of them, by the time they finally see you, have lost everything, homes, family, all of it.
Mhm.
That it's the shame piece
Yeah.
that shows up. And we know that, and this is what I work with my clients on, shame is about identity. If the enemy can steal your identity, he's going to do it
Mhm.
and run with it. And so I
Mhm.
would bet that that is a huge hill to climb.
Right.
Um,
And look, this is an ancient problem, right? It goes all the way back
yes,
to the third chapter of Genesis.
yes, it does.
You know,
Yes,
so after they partook of food, the first thing they did was they hid. And so that's the thing about this kind of
wow.
addiction, is that it does tend to be very isolating.
Hmm.
It separates us. We
Hmm.
hide,
Hmm.
and um, you know, because if you have, let's say you have an alcohol, you struggle with alcohol, you have an alcohol addiction. Well, you can go to Bailey's Sports Bar. You can watch the game with the guys, 30 guys, and get drunk, right? But how many of those guys are you going to ask to go home with you and watch porn?
Right,
Well, none. And pair masturbation with that, and I guarantee you it's none.
right, right.
And so it is a very isolating. And then because it does then increase shame, so um, now I have,
Mhm.
I'm distraught about my behavior, and I feel the pain of that shame. So now, naturally, what I want to do is numb that pain,
Right.
numb that shame feeling. And so, what do I turn to? I
My coping
turn to
mechanism.
what I've been turning to for years.
Okay.
I turn to my addiction.
All right. Quick question for you, a little bit
Mhm.
off the subject, but what is the average age now, of exposure to pornography? A couple of years ago, maybe even 4 years ago, I was reading it was like 7. What is it
Um,
now?
I've heard 11
Okay.
statistically, but
Okay.
I will tell you that anecdotally, um, more recently, the people who are coming to see me most often report around 8 years old.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
That's mind
And
blowing.
it's mind blowing. The brain of an 8-year old is nowhere near prepared
No,
for that.
no,
And we
it's
do know
not.
the earlier you are this is Carnes's work, the earlier you're subjected to, especially digital material,
Hmm.
the more likely you're going to have an actual addiction,
Yeah.
not just sexually compulsive behavior.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. So, I'm just going to lob another question at you too, and then I'm going to circle us back to the Center for Sexual and Relational Health. Is there a link between ADD/ADHD? I realize they're different, and pornography addiction.
Yes, 70+%. I cannot remember that exact. I want to say 73. I'm not 100% sure. But there definitely is a correlation. So it's not a causation, but
Right.
statistically, there is a correlation between ADD, ADHD, and sexual addiction.
I
And
could,
statistically, ADHD, ADD individuals, it's a tendency, right? So that's 51% or more.
right.
There's a tendency for those folk to be more hypersexual than the general population.
Okay.
So combine
So,
that with the compulsive part of
and it's a
that,
recipe
right?
for,
That's
yeah.
right.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So, talk to me about, and real quick, about anxiety and the link between anxiety and that and pornography addiction. Is there a clear link?
A correlation.
Okay.
Okay. So again, some people are one of the um, main neuropathways. Therefore, one of the main neuropathways in sex addiction is the numbing pathway. And again, that's uncomfortable, any uncomfortable what you would consider, whoever you are,
Right,
a
right.
negative emotion.
Mhm.
Um, what we have a tendency to do in addiction especially is to numb that. And so that numbing pathway, again, some people will numb it with shopping,
Yep,
with alcohol,
yep,
drugs,
yep.
sex, work for some
Right.
people, right? Gambling.
Yes, yes.
I mean, there are all kinds of sugar. I mean, there are all
Right.
kind of ways that we're going to numb that so we
And
can.
can we just say that even some of those ways are applauded, like workaholism?
Yes, absolutely. And
So,
and look, um, when a lot of people struggling with an addiction say they want to feel better, what they're really saying is they want to feel less. I want to feel less
wow,
anxious. I want to feel
wow.
less bored. I want to feel less lonely. I
Yeah,
want to feel less shame. I want to feel less pain. Fill in the blank.
right.
And often that's what they actually are saying.
That's powerful. That is
Mhm.
so powerful. Um, so so I'm gonna take us back to what the center is that you have
Sure.
co-founded, the Center for Sexual and Relational Health. I love the fact that you are set up. Basically, I would call it turnkey, not to take the humanity out of it, but you guys are a wonderful resource for both parties in a marriage where this has occurred. A lot of people want to just go to marriage counseling right off, and our facility has the philosophy that where there's chronic addiction, where there is chronic abuse, that is not going to be the solution because each
Hmm.
person needs to be working individually.
Right.
And so when I have someone come into my office, a female, that's typically who I work with, and she's telling me everything is just exploded. I call it ground zero, where she's just found out everything that's going on. And again, this is not just limited to men having the addiction, but in most of the cases, that's what I'm hearing about. And so, what I will tell her is we have, a center that we refer to for your husband because he needs to work with a certified sex addiction therapist and be evaluated, because it does require some special training to
Hmm.
work through all
Hmm.
of this. I mean, I've seen this. You guys do phenomenal work, and I've seen this on the other side. And so, what I'll explain is that the husband is going to begin therapy, that the spouse who's in my office at some point will begin therapy sessions with a counselor on your staff who specializes working with betrayal trauma
Hmm.
and certified sex addiction therapist. When the right time happens, you guys walk them through a number of steps, one of which is disclosure. full
Mhm.
disclosure. We're not going to get into all of that today, but other than to say that, and then you do something that is called an impact letter at a certain point, and both therapists are talking together very closely to determine when each of the parties is ready for the next step. And then
Mhm.
once it's, and I know there I'm leaving something else out, but when you guys come to the point that you feel like they are ready, then you move into marriage counseling so that they can weather the storms that they weren't able to weather before that together, and where you teach them tools for how to work through their triggers and their emotionally charged discussions. How'd I do?
You did great.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Good.
So, because I mean, there are four times we don't do couples therapy, or we say you're not ready for it. If there's an ongoing affair, because we do deal
Yep.
with infidelity.
Yep.
If there is, if either partner is incapable of empathy, it's
So
really hard to do
personality
couple.
or
Yeah.
mood disorder. Okay.
Mhm. If either, um, if there's criminal domestic violence at play, and
Hmm.
then if there is an addiction that has not yet gained traction,
Hmm.
so we're
Okay.
looking for that traction.
Yeah. Okay.
Also, we do that full disclosure as upfront as possible because what we don't want you to do is really grow in reattaching because this addiction creates attachment wounds. So
Yes.
now we are no longer securely and safely attached to one another, and that's a whole nother
Right.
um, topic um, that Jennifer could probably come and speak about. But so what we don't want to do is for you to start becoming securely attached again, then decide you want a full disclosure, do that full disclosure, and undo all of that.
Right.
Yeah. So
Right.
I'm glad you did come back to the center in terms because it's the Center for Relational and Sexual Health.
Yes.
So we do tend to take a very holistic approach. We look from the spiritual, and that's not religious necessarily, but the spiritual, from the emotional, from the physical, the mental, and the relational aspect. Those are the aspects of our humanity. And so we want to take a holistic look at that.
Yeah.
And that's why we also have someone on our staff who specifically works with trauma in the body, licensed bodywork therapist, and she specifically works with psychological trauma that's blocked in the body. Um, and then we do have an EFT therapist who emotionally focused therapy therapist who
Yep.
specifically works with the attachment wounds. But we have just we didn't put this together. It came together. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we're very grateful for that.
Yeah.
But just, people who come with a variety of skills and talents, um,
You
and
have quite the team assembled.
to
You have
really take a holistic
Yeah, you guys are
approach.
multidisciplined. I love it. You
Mhm.
have you have training in common and credentialing in common, but you all really are multidisciplined, and I love that. And I know
Mhm.
that Life in Abundance is super grateful to have you guys as a resource. As I said, we're not the answer for everyone, and there we stay within the scope of our practice, which means
Mhm.
that some of these things that you and I are talking about that is outside of the scope of our practice. But I love that we have you, and a trustworthy place to send our clients to. So, Hal, I know that we need to draw things to a close today. Would you be willing to come back and talk to us a little more in detail for another podcast?
Absolutely. I'd love to do that.
We would love that. In closing, real quick, what is the best way for our listeners to be able to contact the center?
Yeah. So they can look us up on the web. I will say that website as of today is under construction. We still have it posted, but it is
Yep.
being worked on. So
Okay.
that'll probably be live this week, but that's sexualrelationalcounseling.com.
Okay.
And
Okay.
then our main number is 864-428-1993.
Perfect.
And we have three lovely ladies who help us out and would be glad to help you get in contact with
That's
us.
awesome. That's awesome. So, Hal, again, thank you for joining us. And we're going to look forward to having you back again for another episode where we dive in a little bit deeper with what's involved. What would you say, parting words, what would you say to somebody that has been struggling in silence, afraid to take the next step towards healing the addiction?
Yeah, I would say that um, it's a big ask. But David Hawkins, when he looked at emotions and he looked at the fulcrum that moved you from positivity and life-giving emotions to the emotions that more drain you of your energy, that fulcrum, that emotion or is courage.
Yeah.
So reach out to one trusted individual
Okay.
and speak with them about helping you to develop your courage to reach out and take the next step of actually getting the help and the support that you need.
I love that so much. All right, Hal, we thank you so much for being part of this podcast, and we will look forward to having you back again.
Thank you, Steph.